This episode is brought to you by Patriot Gold Group. Protect your retirement assets from the ups and downs of an uncertain economy. Contact the experts at Patriot Gold. They've been the top-rated gold IRA dealer, get this, for 7 years in a row. Go to patriotgoldgroup.com or call 1-888-621-3856 for a free investor guide. It's Friday, 5 July. Welcome to the President's Daily Brief. I'm Mike Baker, your eyes and ears on the world stage. Let's get briefed. First, it appears that the divisions within Israel's government are growing wider as reports emerge that Israel's top military brass want to see a ceasefire in Gaza, even if such a truce ultimately leaves Hamas in power. Next up, we'll have the latest on the blossoming relationship between Russia and China. Oh, that sounds sweet. As we learn that the Chinese Communist Party, the CCP, is building Iranian-designed attack drones for their pals in Moscow. Plus, several days of violent clashes between Syrian refugees and Turkish troops has prompted Turkey to temporarily shut down their border crossings with Syria. And in today's back of the brief, ahead of a major NATO summit in Washington, D.C. next week, European allies say they've agreed to provide Ukraine with another $43 billion worth of military aid next year. But first, today's PDB Spotlight. We'll start off today in Israel, where internal government disagreements are increasingly spilling into public view as fighting drags on in Gaza, while the risk of war with Hezbollah intensifies along Israel's northern border. The latest rift within Israeli leadership circles came in the wake of an exclusive report from the New York Times that claimed IDF generals are pushing Prime Minister Netanyahu to secure a ceasefire in Gaza, even if it leaves Hamas in power for the time being. Citing 6 current and former security officials, the Times report claimed that the military believes a ceasefire is the only way to secure the release of the remaining hostages. The unnamed officials are reportedly also concerned with the current state of the IDF, saying that the military needs time to recuperate and restock ahead of what most expect to be a wider conflict with Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants in Lebanon. With regards to that situation on Israel's northern border, the officials noted a ceasefire might also go a long way towards helping Israel reach a truce deal with Hezbollah, who've vowed to continue attacking Israel until there's a ceasefire in Gaza. The military shift in thinking is reportedly due to Netanyahu's refusal to outline a specific post-war plan for Gaza, which these anonymous officials claim has created a power vacuum that Hamas is once again filling. They also point out that Hamas has proven more resilient than the IDF initially thought, forcing the IDF to return to various areas of Gaza as reconstituted Hamas battalions fight to retake the enclave. A former Israeli national security advisor told the New York Times, quote, "The military is in full support of a hostage deal and a ceasefire. They believe that they can always go back and engage Hamas militarily in the future. They understand that a pause in Gaza makes de-escalation more likely in Lebanon, and they have less munitions, less spare parts, less energy than they did before. So they also think a pause in Gaza gives the Israelis and the IDF more time to prepare in case a bigger war does break out with Hezbollah." End quote. Now, Netanyahu was reportedly none too pleased with the report and issued a scathing statement on Tuesday admonishing the anonymous sources who spoke with the Times. Netanyahu, as you are likely aware, has promised that Israeli operations in Gaza will not permanently end until Israel has achieved, quote, total victory over Hamas. He unequivocally rejected the sentiments of the anonymous IDF generals, saying he will never agree to a ceasefire that allows Hamas to continue governing Gaza. Netanyahu said, quote, "I don't know who these unnamed parties are, but I'm here to make it unequivocally clear it won't happen. We will end the war only after we have achieved all of its goals, including the elimination of Hamas and the release of all our hostages. The political echelon defined these goals for the IDF, and the IDF has all the means to achieve them," end quote. Now, Netanyahu added that we will not succumb to defeatism, neither at the New York Times nor anywhere else. We are filled, he said, with the spirit of victory. It's worth noting that a ceasefire plan was on the table just last month, and Netanyahu was ready to agree to it. But Hamas ultimately rejected the proposal, tacking on a series of extreme demands at the 11th hour. Still, the internal argument is just the latest incident to demonstrate cracks inside Jerusalem's once unified wartime government. As we discussed earlier this week, the apparent accidental release of the former director of the Al-Shifa hospital in Gaza caused long-simmering internal tensions within Jerusalem to explode into public view on Monday, as various ministers and senior security officials traded blame. Meanwhile, fighting between Israel and Hezbollah militants continues to escalate in the north. On Wednesday, Israel took out another senior Hezbollah commander in an airstrike. That's the third senior commander to be killed since fighting began in October. And Hezbollah responded by sending a barrage of 100 rockets towards Israeli military positions. Officials said that there were no casualties from the attack, as most of the rockets landed in open areas. All right, coming up after the break, it appears China may be expanding their support for Russia with direct military aid, as reports emerge that the CCP is building Iranian-style attack drones for their friends in Moscow. Plus, several days of violent clashes between Syrian refugees and Turkish troops has prompted Turkey to temporarily shut down their border crossings with Syria. I'll have those stories when we come back. Welcome back to the PDB. Shifting our focus to China, reports have emerged that the CCP has partnered with Russian companies to build Iranian-style Shahed attack drones for Moscow, a move that suggests China may be reneging on promises to the West to stay out of the war in Ukraine. Not that they've actually stayed out of the war in Ukraine. The Chinese regime has been an economic lifeline for Putin ever since his invasion kicked off back in early 2022. In an exclusive report by Bloomberg on Tuesday, unnamed European officials said intelligence indicates that Chinese companies are already developing and testing these drones, which they've reportedly dubbed the Sunflower 200. Who comes up with these names? The new drones are modeled on the Iranian-made Shahed drones that Russia has used with, frankly, devastating effect on Ukraine since their invasion in February 2022, particularly due to the ongoing shortage of air defense systems in Ukraine. While Russia has had no problem relying on Iran for extra military equipment, well, the Islamic regime's manufacturing capabilities are limited. The anonymous European officials told Bloomberg that there is significant concern that China could produce these attack drones at a far greater rate than Iran, giving Putin a significant aerial advantage over Kyiv. Now, if the reports can be confirmed, China is coming dangerously close to directly arming Russia's war machine in Ukraine, and that's something that they have promised Western leaders that they would not do, and it'd be out of character for the CCP to renege on a promise. As a reminder, Western concerns have been mounting over China's ongoing economic support of Moscow, which has allowed Putin to rebuild his military-industrial base. Up until this point, however, China has not directly supplied arms to Russia, unlike, of course, North Korea and Iran. China has instead tried to position itself as a mediator between Ukraine and Russia, sending envoys to both countries. It's worth mentioning that Xi's regime has never condemned the invasion by Putin or even formally called the conflict a war. They even recently outlined a peace proposal for Ukraine, although that plan was universally rejected by the West for granting Russia major portions of Ukrainian territory. There's a shock. Despite their efforts to paint themselves as a moderating influence on Putin, their frankly unwavering economic support of Moscow clearly negates their claims of neutrality. Still, CCP leaders continue to feign ignorance. Reacting to the drone report, officials with the Chinese embassy in Washington, D.C. once again denied that they're providing any weaponry to Russia. A spokesman said, quote, "It's quite clear to the international community who is calling for dialogue and striving for peace, and who is fueling the fight and inciting confrontation," end quote. Officials in Russia, meanwhile, well, they simply refused to comment on the report. The report comes as Putin and CCP leader Xi Jinping met face-to-face on Wednesday for the second time in recent months at a summit in Kazakhstan. The pair hailed their, quote, no-limits partnership and vowed to continue opposing Western attempts to dominate the global order. And then they exchanged friendship bracelets and went on their way. Okay, I want to turn our attention to Turkey, where escalating violence prompted the country to seal off its border crossings into Syria on Tuesday. The unprecedented measure was taken in response to recent attacks on Turkish troops by Syrians, who were themselves angered by recent violence against their compatriots within Turkey. For some background, Turkey has been a refuge for Syrians fleeing the civil war since 2011, opening its borders and building camps, hosting approximately 3.1 million refugees. Over time, however, economic and political shifts have strained relations between Turks and Syrian asylum seekers. The violence in Turkey was sparked on Sunday by social media allegations of a Syrian man sexually abusing a child relative, resulting in angered Turks attacking Syrian individuals and property, resulting in the detention of 470-plus individuals. Angry residents reportedly told Syrians to leave, and the unrest spread to other regions. On Monday, the city of Afrin in northwest Syria witnessed the most severe clashes as Syrians took out their anger on Turkish border troops, resulting in at least 4 fatalities amid exchanges of gunfire between the Turkish soldiers and armed Syrian protesters. Skirmishes and clashes occurred in several towns, with protesters attacking Turkish convoys and desecrating flags. Amid the chaos, Turkey closed down the country's 2 main border crossings with Syria, along with other smaller border crossings, significantly impacting trade and travel for over 3 million inhabitants in the area. Turkish President Erdogan emphasized that neither Turkey nor its Syrian allies would succumb to racist vandalism. In his remarks, Erdogan highlighted the return of over 670,000 people to northern Syria, where Turkey has established safe zones, and reiterated Turkey's commitment to addressing the refugee issue humanely and in accordance with economic realities. Turkish officials labeled the unrest in Syria as, quote, provocations, with Turkey's foreign ministry urging against using the tragic events as a pretext for further conflicts. In his speech on Tuesday, Erdogan attributed the chaos to Syrian groups linked with terrorist organizations, vowing to expose the, quote, dirty hands behind the turmoil on Turkish troops. Erdogan also mentioned the possibility of meeting with Syrian President Bashar al-Assad to mend bilateral relations. All right, after the break, European allies say they've agreed to provide Ukraine with another $43 billion worth of military aid ahead of a major NATO summit in Washington, D.C. next week. We'll examine that in today's Back of the Brief. I'll be right back. In today's Back of the Brief, NATO allies agreed on Wednesday to provide military aid worth $43 billion to Ukraine next year, announcing the package just a week before NATO leaders are scheduled to meet in Washington, D.C. for a critical summit. NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg previously had urged allies to commit to a multi-year plan to maintain military aid for Ukraine at the same level as it has been since Russia's full-scale invasion in 2022. Although member states did not support Stoltenberg's original request for a multi-year plan, the new agreement includes provisions to reassess contributions at future NATO summits. The financial commitment is part of a larger support package for Ukraine that NATO leaders will finalize at the Washington summit from July 9th to 11th. Last month, NATO allies agreed to take a more active role in coordinating arms supplies to Ukraine, a task previously led by the U.S. This shift aims to maintain support for Ukraine amid NATO ally concerns about former President Donald Trump's potential return to the White House, given his, relatively speaking, NATO skeptic stance. The U.S.-led Ramstein Group, which coordinated military aid for Ukraine since Russia's invasion, will continue to operate as a political forum. However, NATO will assume the military coordination role, ensuring more structured support for Ukraine's defense efforts. Now, this change is seen as a strategic move to, quote, Trump-proof the aid process, giving NATO a more direct role without committing its own forces. Despite this new arrangement, diplomats acknowledge that the U.S. remains the dominant power within NATO and provides the majority of weaponry to Ukraine. Therefore, any significant reduction in U.S. support would still have a substantial impact on overall aid. As the Washington summit approaches, NATO allies remain divided on how to address Ukraine's future membership in the alliance. While NATO's official stance is that Ukraine will join eventually, some member states are pushing for stronger language to affirm Ukraine's path to membership. And that, my friends, is the President's Daily Brief for Friday, 5 July. And as you've probably heard from family and friends, to listen to the show ad-free, well, become a premium member of the President's Daily Brief simply by visiting pdbpremium.com. And finally, if it's Friday, and I am fairly confident that it is Friday, that means a new episode of our extended weekend version of the PDB Situation Report, lands on the First TV at 10 p.m. this evening. It's also available on our YouTube channel at President's Daily Brief, and of course, wherever you get your podcast stuff. I'm Mike Baker, and I'll be back later today with the PDB Afternoon Bulletin. Until then, stay informed, stay safe, stay cool.